Gents, I just want to pause the episode for a moment to let you know about the Strong Men of Value Academy. You will have heard me refer to it a number of times, and I want to bring more attention to it. So this isn't just a program, it's a life-changing environment and community of men who are focused on personal and professional growth. We're looking at areas of relationships, wealth, and health, things to help you thrive and maximize your life. Imagine having bi-monthly one-on-one coaching sessions with myself, weekly group coaching calls, and an incredible brotherhood of high achievers by your side. Now we're diving into resilience, leadership, and holistic growth to not just succeed in your career, but to thrive in your health and your relationships. Your journey to greatness, it starts here. So join the movement and you can apply for the Strong Men of Value Academy. You can head to themanthatcanproject.com to find out more. Today on the show, we have Shana James joining me from California. Now, Shana has been a coach for over 15 years, coaching CEOs, leaders, authors, and many, many other people to step into more powerful leadership and understand how they can take ownership of areas of their life. So it's, I'm very grateful to have had her on with all the knowledge. So she was actually studying psychology, her master's in psychology, and was heading towards working with females until she had an opportunity to work with men and just really got to see another side of how men thought and operated, and just felt called to work with men. So during this episode, we talk about why men get confused, ashamed, and disheartened in dating and relationships, why men are afraid to express emotional and sexual desires, common dissatisfactions and sticking points within love, and shame around men wanting sex and affection, plus a lot more. So strap in. If you're running, walking, don't worry, I'll attach all the links that we discuss and say I'm going to share in the show notes so you can look into those after. But let it sink in. This is going to be a phenomenal episode. If you're tuning in for the first time, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified from all our latest episodes and join the free Facebook group. Now, man, we have an incredible audience from all around the world. And we have an incredible community where you can join for free. Plus, we have the Inner Circle, which is aimed at helping men create more momentum in their life to take their life to that next level. So we have the accountability, we have the coaching, we have all the tools and resources that you can apply to your own life to start taking those action steps. So to find out more, head over to themanthatcanproject.com/inner circle, and I look forward to connecting with you guys in there. As for now, let's dive into today's episode with our incredible guest, Shana James.
You're listening to the Man That Can Project with Lachlan Stuart, a global movement created to empower men and open up what's really going through their minds by having real and raw conversations about life's unique challenges and our individual ways of processing it all. Welcome to the Man That Can Project.
Welcome back to another episode of the Man That Can Projects podcast. I am your host, Lachlan Stuart, and today we have a phenomenal guest that I am so excited to have on. So it's crazy how this works, and we were just saying offline with Shana. 3 weeks probably it felt like before we actually got connected, I was looking for someone with the knowledge and skill set that Shana has, and all of a sudden you turned up in my inbox, and here we are about to hand it over to you to have some extremely insightful knowledge across some various areas, which I'll talk about in a moment, going from confusion and shame around dating and relationships, how we can express emotional and sexual desires, which is a very probably taboo subject for a lot of people to discuss, dissatisfactions and sticking points in love life, and wherever the conversation takes us. But you've had over 15 years as a coach, and you're a psychologist as well, right?
I have a master's in psychology, but I decided to become a coach instead of a therapist. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. Like that just blows my mind with the experience and knowledge that you must have accumulated, but over 15 years. And initially when you were doing your master's of psychology, you felt like you were heading towards working with females, and then you ended up working with males. So can you take us through that, and obviously how you've gone to where you are today?
Yeah, how that happened. Well, I was part of an intentional community back then in my 20s, and we were young and naive. And, our hearts were so pure and our hearts were really in it. And there were a couple guys who were in that community who, as we were all practicing authentic relating and honest relating, they got a ton out of it. I mean, we all did. And, they felt more confident and more open, and women were seeing them as more attractive. And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. We want to create a course where men get honest and loving feedback from women. And so they created the Authentic Man program. And I was one of the first women on the team of women who got to give men honest and loving feedback. And it really it rocked my world, I would say, to suddenly be faced with the real, internal life of men, as opposed to like the masks and the facades, and they got it all together. And I don't know, it just changed me forever. And I kind of had this sense of, oh my God, this is my calling to really work with men and get to be human and get to love men and be honest. And it all happened from there.
It's incredible. So when you say intentional community, that's the first time I've heard that. So can you explain a bit about that? What actually is it?
Yeah, it was a group of us who we came together, and we were 20 something. We didn't have kids, so we had a lot of time on our hands, and we were practicing relating. So we were being honest with each other. We were sharing, like, here are my needs and desires, and here are my needs and desires, and here's where I'm resenting you, and here's where I'm attracted to you, or here's where I'm not attracted to you. Like, we were attempting to, relate with each other in a way that would forward human connection or evolution, in a way, is how we thought of it. And we made a lot of messes.
How does that just blows my mind, because at 20, that was the last thing I was thinking about. I was deceitful, lying. I didn't know how to communicate. So how did a community of 20-something-year-olds just decide that, hey, we want to be authentic and honest and actually have the emotional intelligence or self-awareness to do that? Like, how did that come up for you guys?
No, I mean, in some ways, I think, some of us were just born weird like that. Like, I just knew that something was strange where I grew up, that nobody was really talking about what was going on. And every time I would ask about it, people would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, I feel something inside of you. And I never, again, as I've done this work, it's like, I don't want to make assumptions about people, but we can feel each other and sense each other when you really start tuning into each other. And so I came out to San Francisco, which is, the hippie mecca, in the 1970s or so, or 60s, right? When like the hippie lifestyle was happening. But I think in the 90s and 2000s, there was kind of a resurgence of people who just really wanted to be alive and real and expressed. And so we all kind of conglomerated in one place.
That is incredible. How was it for you, like when you first started having that, I guess, authentic conversation, to even like, because I feel like, and especially from a men's perspective, I was just with a group of lads, and, you hear the conversation around what people talk about, but then I also know a lot of them don't express that, around desires. You touched on desires, and even being honest around how we feel about people and stuff like that. So did you find it easy at the beginning to do that, or what sort of tools or strategies allowed you to get better at that?
Yeah, I found it really hard and scary. And I still find it scary, but now having 20 years or so of experience, it's a lot easier. But it's pretty terrifying, right? To reveal the things that you think, well, this is going to make someone find me unlovable or unattractive, or, this is going to make this person really upset with me because I'm actually being honest about my reaction to that, whatever they said, as opposed to just trying to be nice. So I was definitely raised with the good girl. My dad actually said to me a lot, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And so it definitely has not been easy, but it's so much more fulfilling. When I look at the relationships in which I've actually had these deeper, honest conversations, like, there's a real bond between us. And I feel like I can relax with those people, as opposed to being awkward or being on edge, not really talking about what's going on for real.
That's such an important point, and I think it's a good thing to highlight, especially, and once again, over here in Australia, the bloke culture is much like that, and we often feel like we're always wearing a weight vest, or we're carrying so much baggage because we don't know how to communicate, whether it's with our mates or our partners, and having the conversations, as you mentioned, it's not uncomfortable, and you've been, I guess, intentionally doing that for over 20 years, and you still don't find it comfortable. So for those listening, it maybe doesn't get easier, but you've also seen
it gets easier. No, it definitely gets easier, but I would just say it's not necessarily easy, right?
Gotcha.
So I have more trust. I have a lot of trust in the process. And I have a partner who I've been with for about 3.5 years. And, we go through some moments that don't feel good. Or I even said to him the other night, we're having a conversation. We do a practice sometimes where we just inquire into, okay, what's happening over here? What's happening over there? And we share it. And I said, my heart feels really flat. It feels kind of dead. I'm not really feeling a lot of love right now. And then I kind of just sat with it, and I was like, and I notice I'm having a hard time trusting you. And right. So it started this whole dynamic where it's like, if the other person doesn't take it personally, then you can actually go into, oh, okay, well, what's happening? What's going on? How do we get to know each other more instead of trying to be, again, nice to each other and then feeling unknown, unseen, unloved, misunderstood, right?
That's incredible. That's awesome that you do that. And I think taking the time to check in, but you said there as well, don't, like, if the other person doesn't take it personally. So I think there's, I guess, ownership on, for ourselves, and obviously, our partners should be in that same boat, where we would hope that they're accepting responsibility, because as you sort of alluded to, it's to strengthen the relationship, but it's what's honestly going on for you, and nothing is ever just continually going up. And as we evolve and change, priorities and focus change, so you can go through moments where you feel unloved, maybe your values aren't being met, or you don't feel comfortable expressing your desires and everything like that, which is, I still find that challenging to have those conversations. Where would someone start with that? Because I know one of the biggest things that comes up in our community is relationships, like the struggles with relationship. Men struggle around communication, and I know that could probably stem into, we're going to talk about desires and expressing stuff like that. But then also how to have the tough conversations. A lot of men struggle to articulate or put into words what it is that they're feeling or expressing, experiencing. So how do you sort of, what would you say
to get started?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of what I do in the coaching that I do with men, is help kind of, take it from this amorphous, like, something doesn't feel good. Or like, I want something, but I'm not quite sure what it is, or I want it and I know what it is, but if you have a female partner, like, she may not like it. So all those things. So, one of the pieces that I love is context. And so when you start a conversation without context, people make up a lot of their own stories and fears and frustrations and all of that. When you start with context, which would be something more like, if you want to try something sexually, right? If you're saying something like, hey, I want to try this thing, the other person might be like, oh no, he's not satisfied. He's not attracted to me anymore. He's getting bored with our sex life. All these things, right? That could kind of be loaded up on the fear end of the other person. But if you start with the context of, I was just, exploring, and I love what we're doing, and I just got this idea for what could make it even more powerful or more interesting, or I saw this and it really intrigued me. And, would you be open to having a conversation about something else we could try? It's a totally different beginning of a conversation. Now, I also just said, like, would you be willing to have a conversation? It may not be in that moment that is the best time, because it may catch someone off guard and they may not be ready. And so the would you be willing question is a really good one. And, continuing to frame things around how it can be good for us and what you actually also want for the other person, not just yourself, are some really good tools for that.
Definitely. And I think it's really important to just start having those conversations. You're never going to articulate it. I know for myself, like even
Right.
to this day, I still miscommunicate words and forget things. And you take the feedback from that going, whoops, probably shouldn't have said it like that. That was maybe
Yeah.
too direct, or that wasn't the way that I meant to say it. But then you can take that feedback, or you can even pull yourself up on it, right? You can say, hey, sorry, that
Mhm.
came out not how I wanted it to. Sorry, let me
Yeah.
rephrase that. But I think it's really important. And the language that you just used there is really inclusive in terms of, making the other person feel valued and heard, but then also
Exactly. Yeah.
allowing them to agree to the conversation going ahead rather than just saying, hey, this is it. This is what
Yeah.
I want to talk about. And
Yeah. And I also find that, it can be vulnerable and you don't have to hide that. So oftentimes when I'm working with a man, and he's like, God, I feel really scared to say this. And I'm like, you can say that. That doesn't make you weak. That doesn't make you small, right? There's a way to really own, oh, I have a fear here. I'm afraid that if I say this to you, you're going to get upset or you're going to walk away or you're not going to want to have this conversation. And there's this balance, right, of heart and strength, or vulnerability and strength. I think they go together, which is like I can stand up for myself and I can say what my needs and desires are or ask for them. And then I can also be in my heart and acknowledge if there's vulnerability there. And oftentimes that ends up being respected on the other end. Now, sometimes I work with men who are in relationships where women are not used to men being open and vulnerable. And so it can be a little bit shocking. And so then I often work with the man on, again, going back to that place of like, if you're good with you, then if she's kind of freaking out over there, it's not a personal affront. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to protect yourself, right? You can just kind of be like, oh, what's happening for you? Or wow, it seems like you were really surprised by this, as opposed to, wow, I must be bad and wrong and she's going to leave and I'm horrible. And so the clearer we are about our own goodness or rightness, the easier it is to endure or tolerate when someone else is not happy with us.
I love that. And it brings it back to stuff that we can control, because there
Yes.
seems to be a theme, especially within our community, obviously men who maybe have never done any self-development or anything like that before. And for a lot of them, they come to me off the back of maybe a relationship breakdown or something like that, which is a funny motivator, but it is a powerful motivator.
No, it's definitely often one of the big motivators.
Yeah, to get men going. Um, And one of the things that sort of flows off the back of that is when they start putting in the work, their partner is completely blindsided by it, and they're not prepared for it themselves. So then the men go, well, I've been doing everything that they wanted me to do, but now they don't like it, or it's confusing, and they don't really know what to do with that next. But sort of
Yeah.
tying that back into what you were just saying. So if we can be comfortable enough in ourselves, we can then check in on them and really seek to understand what it's like for them, and maybe explain a
Yes.
little bit more about what we're trying to achieve and why we feel it will, bring the relationship to that next level.
Yeah. I also love the going a little bit meta or taking a step back and having a conversation with a partner about how do we want to communicate with each other? What are we actually looking for here? Like, what would make you feel happier? What would make me feel happier? Because if we dive into these conversations without this larger context of here's how it fits in our relationship, or here's the relationship we have, like some people don't have a relationship where they're actually growing together or having these deeper conversations. And so if suddenly that shifts, it's a implicit context shift, right? It's not explicit, it's not made aware on the surface, but suddenly the other person can feel like the rug got pulled out from under them. So, you know, I tend to work with men who, the ones who are married, have relationships where they've never really talked about how do we want to talk to each other? How do we want to communicate? When you have a desire, how do I want to respond to that? When I have a desire, how do you want to, how do we both want to like be a team here together to support each other, as opposed to just two people trying to get their needs met without actually communicating about it?
It's crazy. It's like trying to go find, or here in Australia, drive to the Gold Coast without a GPS, or drive somewhere in the States without a GPS. We think we might get there.
Yeah.
How, like, obviously, maybe a common theme might be the longer that you've been with your partner, it's harder to, I guess, go back and set those rules. So obviously the earlier, the better, I would imagine with that. But for anyone at any point in a relationship, how would they go about, I guess, initiating that conversation?
Yeah. Right. I mean, on the one hand, you could, yes, the earlier the better. Like it's best to build a foundation before you build a house on top of it versus like trying. Otherwise, you have to, I've seen this, right? You've got to go lift up the whole house to put the foundation in below, but you can always do it. And so, if ever you realize, oh, there isn't a context set for this, or we aren't on the same page here, I highly suggest going back and having those conversations. And one of the simple ways to do that is I like the phrase, I'm noticing. And it could be something about us, right? Like I'm noticing that we seem to be spending less and less time together. Or I'm noticing that when I start to initiate sex, you don't really seem as into it. And so I was wondering if we could talk about that, or I would love to have that conversation. And would you be willing to have that conversation with me?
That's a brilliant way to put it, because I know for a long time for myself, I internalized that, and then I became resentful, and I built up all these stories in my head, and it just made me frustrated. And then it would
Yeah.
it would create a ripple effect into other areas, of the relationship. I was like, well, I'm not doing that for you because I'm still thinking about everything
Exactly.
else.
Right. You haven't done that for me, so I'm not doing that for you. And instead of talking about it, I do that too. I mean, like I said, I was raised kind of in the good girl.
Yeah.
I hold on to things and then I resent people until then they all come out. And I mean, it doesn't happen like that as much anymore because I've been doing a lot of work, but that's the pattern when either the nice guy or the good girl where we hold on to things we resent and then we get really pissed off at other people for not getting what we want, but we haven't actually talked about it.
Yeah, people aren't mind readers yet. Well,
No.
I know Elon Musk is
Someday,
working.
someday
Yeah,
we probably will evolve into that.
I believe so. Elon Musk is working on some pretty crazy stuff, I've read. So we'll see what happens. But it's a big point to, I guess, tie all that back in for all the men listening, or even the ladies that listen. It's so important to just start practicing communication. And if you don't feel comfortable with your partner yet,
Yeah.
grab a mate, or find, reach out to one of us, or there's even videos. Like I've found just recording myself, you don't have to post them anywhere, but just watch your own videos back and start talking about
Oh
what it is that
yeah.
you want to discuss. Because you can find out how your language is, maybe how you structure a sentence or a question, and give yourself feedback. But
Yeah.
if you keep internalizing it, you're going to end up, like we've both just shared, fairly resentful and angry, and it's not a key to a
Totally.
healthy relationship. So why
No.
do
And the one thing I just want to say is like, people don't want you to be perfect. They actually want to be connected to you. So just to remember that, right? It's not like you're trying to get this right or trying to get all the words right, or, it's just not about that. It's about bringing your heart and your soul and, connecting with another person with theirs.
That is beautiful. That is amazing. And that's one thing I've noticed. And one thing I love about spending time with females is they're so much more connected with their feelings. Like, just generally speaking, I know even with the men in our community, we've got a book club, and we read Way of the Peaceful Warrior this month, if you've
Mhm.
ever read that. But it's really spiritual. And a lot of
Yeah.
the guys just didn't like it because of
Yeah.
that. They're like, there's nothing in this. And I was like, well, I thought a lot of people wouldn't like it for that fact, but also it really highlights just how disconnected a lot of us are to just allowing ourselves to enjoy a good fable. And
Yeah.
one thing I think where a lot of the men that are in our community, and myself included, is learning to be more vulnerable and connect more with our partner. I still know I'm reserved in certain areas, and a lot of people are, and it's not fun having to wear that mask. Like we need to, it's that analogy around being onions. Like we still need to keep peeling
Yeah.
back, and we never get. There's always more work to do, but
Always
I think
more.
to really create those deep relationships, like what we see on the Notebook and all that sort of stuff. Like we think a relationship just gets there.
I know.
We have
I really do.
unrealistic.
I still have that fantasy, and I've been writing a little bit about, right, like letting go. I had this moment in the car with my kid when he was 4 or 5 years old, and we were listening to this fairy tale. And at the end, it said, and they lived happily ever after. And he, from the backseat, this little voice is like, Mom, happily ever after is not real, is it? And I was like, what did you just say? I was like, where did you hear that? And he said, well, my dad told me. And I was like, okay, first of all, that's amazing. And second of all, what do I say now? Because, he's little and I don't want to dash his hopes and dreams. But at the same time, I was like, you know what? It's actually not real. Happily ever after, like there's a lot of work and there's a lot of, connection that needs to happen or communication that needs to happen, but things can be happy, but it's not just happily ever after, rainbows and butterflies. So he was a little young to have a deeper conversation, but it just felt good. I was like, if I had learned from a young age that happily ever after wasn't real, I would not have done so many of the things that I did that were painful, in relationships.
100%, 100%. So why do you feel like so many men get confused and ashamed and even disheartened around relationships or even just dating in general?
Yeah. I think it seems to men like, women can have the upper hand or women are the ones who say no. I mean, I feel for you guys because you put yourself out there in a way a lot more. I remember in this workshop that I was helping facilitate when we were practicing before it started, I had to take on the role of being a man and approaching a woman. And, so my name was Shane instead of Shana. And I was like, I dressed up, wore a hat, whatever. I started crying. I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying because someone could say no to me, So I think that feels like part of it, the fear of rejection and that sense that someone could reject me for who I am, even though it's not really about you, right? People don't really know you. They're not really rejecting you, but I think that's a huge part of it. And I think there's also a lot of shame around being a vibrant, alive, masculine, powerful presence. And it can scare people. And if it's not balanced with heart, right, it can create a lot of destruction. But if it is balanced with heart, it is gorgeous. And not all women know how to accept that or welcome that or say yes to that because it can be scary. So it just gets confusing. You guys are often told that's too much or that's too selfish or that's too this or that. And the culture, right, of trying to be a nice guy that kind of went as a wave through many, many generations. I think there are a lot of men who are suffering as a result of that.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. It is one of the scariest things. And I know a lot of men, everyone, just people in general, a lot of people struggle with self-confidence, self-worth. But then when we're trying to put ourselves out there in the dating world and the rejection's such a big thing, and then we internalize that, and like you mentioned, it's not always personal, but we take it personally, and it can really cripple a lot of people. Like it's just like, I'm not going to put myself out there because there's only so much rejection I can take. And that can happen in even relationships going together, whether it's from the sexual part, the activities part. There's so many things that where rejection just plays a part, and eventually you can get to a point where like, I'm tired.
Ugh, right. I don't want that anymore. And, in a relationship with someone, when you have a partnership, I feel like if you're feeling rejected a lot, it's a dynamic that really needs some work or needs some help, right? Because there are ways for people to say no that aren't rejection. And it also may be, right, that the taking it personally. I mean, I do a lot of spiritual work as well, where I now know that one in me who takes things personally is not actually really me. It's this young one in me that often needs some attention and needs some love and care. But if I let that one drive the bus and make the decisions and speak, like if I let that one have the microphone, things don't go very well. So, there's a lot that you can do to navigate. And even the rejection piece, again, the more if you do work with someone like you or someone like myself who can help you find that depth of, love for yourself or belief in yourself, then the rejection part doesn't feel so personal and so shattering.
Yeah, it's getting to that. Once again, I know something that you're big on is getting people to take ownership for themselves, and that's the same as us. And if you get back to a point where you're certain in who you are and your values and why you're doing what you're doing, like
Yeah.
it still doesn't make rejection fun, but it becomes,
Right.
as you're saying, it gets a little bit easier because you still can check in with yourself and know why you're doing things. But obviously over the last 15 to 20 years, you've worked with thousands of people, and I know you've worked with authors, CEOs, leaders, like some of the everyone's incredible, but some big, impressive, powerful people. But what do you feel like are some of the most common dissatisfactions and sticking point within love life? Because obviously you've had such a diverse um, working career so far with who you've
Yeah.
mentored, who you've coached. Has there been any like common patterns or themes around that?
Yeah. I think the people who come to me tend to feel somewhat deadened inside, and it or like there's some part of them that doesn't feel alive anymore. And sometimes it's being single and out of a relationship, or after a breakup, and suddenly that the world opens up of like, ouch, this really hurts and now I'm really feeling it. Sometimes it's not having been in a relationship for a long time. Sometimes it's being in a marriage and realizing like, wow, I feel more lonely here than I actually would on my own. But there's some kind of dissatisfaction with how every, like, whether it's a business relationship or romantic relationships, it's life is so much about relationships. And so I think it's usually some kind of dissatisfaction or not feeling understood, not feeling met in relationships.
That's powerful. So what would, I guess, be a few areas people could focus on that could really make sure that the relationship is at the forefront, whether like you were saying, business or personal or intimate, so they can make sure that they sort of stay on top of developing those relationships.
Yeah. I would say, honesty and being more forthcoming, right? If you notice that something rubs you the wrong way, or something doesn't feel aligned, or, whatever it may be, if you notice that kind of, some people call it a niggle, or that feeling in your gut or whatever, if someone says something and you feel kind of offended, or you just notice that there's something about the dynamic that feels stifling or whatever it may be, right? If you can actually start noticing those things and then speaking to them in as artful of a way as possible. But again, I think there's a lot of leeway for, especially for people who identify, for men who identify as nice guys. Like, you often, the men are come to me and they're like, I don't want to be creepy, or I don't want to be an asshole. And I'm like, you have so far to go before you would be creepy or an asshole. Right. And so to trust that you can start to say things, and using I language is really powerful, right? Instead of, you did that thing and you were this way, it's more like, hey, I was really uncomfortable. When you said that thing, I felt uncomfortable, and I'm trying to understand for myself what happened for me. And I'm also curious, what did you mean by that? Or what was your intention when you said that? I'm wondering if we could actually dig into that a little bit, because I think that will help our relationship or our sales, our company leadership and management, whatever it may be.
Such beautiful. Hello?
Oh, I'm
Oh,
here.
no, so my computer's changed screen. Sorry. That's such beautiful language that you've used there. I know even when you were saying that, I'm like thinking there's so many men who just wouldn't feel comfortable communicating like that because it is so vulnerable. And,
Yes.
I know from
Yeah.
the Aussie perspective and where I grew up, for me, I'm like, that just sounds like I'm whinging, or, I'm not taking responsibility, or maybe I need to toughen up and, work through that myself. And I still do
Yeah.
that to this day. And I feel like I'm fairly aware, but there's moments in time where I just got to figure it out myself. Come on, like, don't reach that.
Yeah. I mean, right. And it's not like we can't figure things out by ourselves, but God, men especially are taught to be such islands, and I've watched many, many men in communities who came from that perspective, and I should man up and I should do this on my own, and who have created these really incredible relationships with other men where they're honest and forthcoming. And often what happens as I watch this, because I've facilitated workshops with men and women together, whoever, but when I see the men come together and actually admit something, and another man's like, yeah, actually, me too, or I feel that way, or wow, I'm scared that people are going to see me that way too. And so many men find, oh, I'm not alone. Because if you don't ever say it, you often think, well, that's worse for me. Or, I actually led a group of 5 men through a process around mental fitness and getting to know what I call their saboteur minds. And I remember one of the guys saying, oh my God, I've never talked about my inner critic with other men. And hearing you guys talk about yours, I realize I'm not alone. They're all slightly different, but they're not totally different, right? It's happening for all of us.
100%. That's the communication. What's the saboteur mind? Can you run us through or give a, because I know
Yeah, I mean that's a framing by Shirzad Chamine, who I love his work. It's about positive intelligence, and he's taken some really, really deep and profound spiritual concepts and made them very simplified for the Western mind, I would say. And so, even as a spiritual practitioner, I really appreciate the simplicity of it. So, he talks about the distinction between the saboteur mind and the sage mind, and that the sage mind is, it's more of a pure being state. It's not mental. It's more, a deep coming from a deeper place, from our heart and from our body or soul or whatever you want to call it. And the saboteur mind is more the super ego and the inner critic. And so when you can distinguish, oh, basically everything that comes out of my mouth, that's resentment, that's irritation, that's grumpy, that's beating myself up or someone else up, that's judgmental, like those are our saboteur mind or our saboteur thoughts. And it's not that we should not have them, but when we can actually acknowledge where they're coming from and then start to explore them and understand them versus just dumping them on people, then our relationships tend to go a lot better.
it's awesome. And how do people go about, like, I guess, exploring them a little bit more or trying to understand them? Is there like a process that people can go through? I know you would take people through that, but is there things that they can
Yeah.
do? Is it slowing down and journaling, or is there?
Yeah. Well, he has a quiz too that's really great that you can look up if you look up positive intelligence coaching, and it'll tell you what your saboteurs are. There's the controller, there's the stickler, the pleaser, the avoider, the victim, so you can get a sense of what yours are.
Awesome.
And then, it's really great if you start to actually pay attention to when you feel frustrated, when you feel stuck, when you feel upset, and you start to look at, oh, which part of me is that? Is that the victim part of me that thinks nothing's ever going to change? This is the way it always has to be, right? Oftentimes we take that as, well, this is just who I am. But when you start to get a little bit of distance and a little bit of witness, then you're not as bound by those voices, right? Then you're not as stuck.
That's unreal. I've never looked into that. So I'll post that in the show notes for people if they want to do that quiz. I'll find that and
Yeah.
put it in there. I'll be interested to see what everyone's got there. That's for sure.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. There's another process or typing system called the Enneagram. Do you know that one?
No.
That one, it's more complicated, and I think actually there's a lot of overlaps. But the Enneagram is it kind of spiritually based, but people use it for personalities and stuff too. So there's a bunch of different typing systems, and part of what that says to me is when you can, like I said, when you can kind of step back and just witness yourself, right? I love the Viktor Frankl quote that between stimulus and response,
I
there's a
actually
space. And
wrote that on my whiteboard yesterday. Yeah.
I love it. What is it? Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space,
Is how you can respond. So the quote is here. I got it screenshotted.
it's basically like that's where your freedom is. If you don't just
That's
react, but you're actually consciously responding.
the quality of your life is determined by that space between.
Yeah, because if we're just reacting, and I sometimes I call this, I have a really funny way of talking about it, which is I call it riding the dragon, because I had this image one time when I used to be more volatile and I would feel the fire coming up inside me. One day, for some bizarre reason, I imagined myself riding a little dragon like in my chest. And I started like if the dragon came out, that was where I was going to spew fire and just,
Age.
like explode on someone. And so I was like pulling back the reins, like me on this little dragon. And right when I learned to not say anything in that moment and to wait and just be like, I need a minute. Because if I say something right now, I'm going to really not
Say the
do
right
a good
thing.
thing here. Yeah. And then there are people on the other side who need to get a little bit messy. And it would be better if you actually said something versus just stuffing it all the time. But, that's why I love to practice with men too. We get to have those real time conversations so that you don't have to have it for the first time with someone you love where the stakes are really high.
It's definitely and once again, it all feeds into itself. Like any of those moments that we've sort of spoken about earlier, where you build up that resentment and then it
Yeah.
all comes out at once is not good. Like you say a whole heap of things that you instantly probably regret, but you can't
Right.
take back.
You can't take back. And it doesn't work when you say 5 or 10 things at a time and then someone's like, wait, but that thing, what, yeah, a year ago? Wait, what? So then everyone gets confused and it's
Yeah,
painful when that
it's
happens.
definitely not healthy. But for a lot of the, like that used to be me, and learning to just sit there and think, and even building the discipline or the confidence, because I found it challenging to say, hey, just give me a few minutes to gather my thoughts because I'm probably going to say something like that. That's one of the
Yeah.
toughest things I've ever had to say, especially when you're
To
in,
give yourself the space, like to
yeah.
say, I just need a couple minutes.
And it's like, and
Yeah.
because sometimes it can be like, no, let's deal with it now. And you're like, please, no, I just know how I operate and it's not going to end
Yeah.
well for anyone. Give me 5 minutes and I'm going to go relax.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, to know yourself and to actually give yourself permission that you don't have to rush it. You don't have, even if you're in a conversation, a lot of men who I work with who are single, if they're sitting and having a conversation for the first time and they're like, I need to know what question I'm going to ask and I need
Mm,
to plan ahead. And I'm like, actually, you don't, even if a woman says something and you're like, huh, okay, there's something I want to ask you, but I'm not quite sure what it is yet. Like you can take that time and right, giving that to yourself is so empowering.
definitely. It's allowing yourself to really think about it. And that's in relationships as well. We feel like we need to respond straight away. It's either we don't know it or we don't care enough about it. But it's like, well, how
Yeah.
about you just understand the question and let yourself process it so you can give an honest response. And
Yeah.
I got the thing up here. It's between
The quote.
stimulus and response is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
I
Incredible.
love that.
Yeah.
I mean that it's so profound actually. It's really simple, but it's profound. If everybody listening, if you just actually took a breath and gave yourself permission to not need to defend or protect, but just like come to, what would I say here that would make the biggest difference for us? What would I say here that would have the most positive impact here or move things forward in a way that was that worked rather than broke something.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And being able to identify that. And as you were saying before, you get to connect the dots. The more you sort of check in with yourself and think about things, you can connect the dots on how you respond to things or maybe how you react to things. But going back to, before we were saying a lot of us, the fear of rejection and I guess the shame around getting told no or all of that sort of stuff, like sort of leads
Yeah.
into, for a lot of men, the drive behind wanting, whether it's sexual affection or just affection in general, because a lot of, we were saying before, like everyone craves love and connection. But as men, there's this, whether it's a stigma or generalization around that, we can't be loving and we can't be affectionate. And for what I feel from my own experiences, like I generally get that through sexual intimacy. That's the one time where I can
Right.
be vulnerable and you feel like you're really cared for. But obviously, there's
Yeah.
many other ways you can get that. But I feel like there is a stigma around it. There is shame around it for a lot of men. What have you sort of noticed with that shame, and what, I guess, advice would you give for blokes who feel that way?
Yeah. Right. I mean, when that is the only place that you think you can get it, then there becomes a scarcity, right? And then there's a pressure, and then there's an anxiety, and then there's fear, and then there's all these things. And so then we start to act really interesting in that way. So, I mean, first of all, I work with a lot of men who haven't had those conversations with their partner from a vulnerable place, or from from that deeper why, right? It's like, I would love to have more affection and connection, not just because I love sex, or not just because I love touch, but right, what does it do for you? What does it allow you? You know, if it actually has you feel more vital and more free and more open and more effective at work and all these things, right? It's like starting to have those conversations from a deeper place, or just starting to have the conversation at all. Because a lot of men I've worked with are just kind of feeling like, I guess this is all I get.
Yep.
And I was having a conversation with a man the other day who, we're not working together. We were considering working together, and he's been in a mostly sexless marriage. And, you know, he said, well, I guess if I just try this, and I keep going with this, and I try to work on myself. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, do all of that. And if you're not having a conversation with her so that she's involved in the decisions or in your needs and desires, then you're trying to do it all on your own. And so I guess that's the advice I have, is stop trying to think that you've got to figure it out, and you have to figure it out before you bring it to your partner. Again, whether your partner's, you know, female, male, whoever, it's like, you can bring things unfinished and say, I've been thinking about this, or I have this desire, but I'm not exactly sure how this is going to happen. But I'm wondering if we could look at this together. And to, again, there's that standing up for yourself and saying that something's important to you. Even if it's, I want to, you know, do things together on the weekend, and you don't seem to be interested in it, right? It doesn't always have to be about sex or affection. That doesn't have to, you don't have to just settle for something and be like, oh, I guess this is how our relationship is,
Yeah.
right? You can stand up for yourself in a way that's loving and inspiring. I think that's one of the suggestions I have too, is how can you inspire someone to do something with you or co-create with you, instead of complaining about it, or instead of apologizing and bringing it in that way where it just gets a little bit awkward.
So do you feel like, by, I guess, understanding the expectations you have for what you want from the relationship, and for yourself, and being able to effectively communicate that, can obviously also increase the love and affection anyway, because you're holding
Yeah,
yourself and the relationship to a certain standard. And once again,
that's a great one.
if you're not, you don't have the same expectations from how you want to show up, it's really hard. You know, the love might start strong in the honeymoon phase, but then it all fizzles out. We see that
Yeah.
time and time again. But if we keep checking in on what our expectations are, it keeps raising the bar, and focusing on those areas that we need to, or we want to
Yes.
grow in. Because it does.
I love that.
I love how you were saying that it doesn't just have to be sex and affection. It can be doing things on the weekend, and ultimately, you know, sharing each other's interests. And one of the things, you know, whether not everyone has everything in common with everyone, but like seeking to understand what lights your partner up, or even your mates up, like things that maybe you don't necessarily do together, trying to go for an experience and just understand that you may not like it at all, but it's cool to understand, you know, potentially why they like it, what they get out of
Yes.
it, and stuff like that. And
Yes.
that's a great way to practice, once again, the communication, because it doesn't have to be about the hard taboo subjects just yet.
Right.
It could be
Right.
about,
Exactly. You could start with these smaller ones.
yeah,
Just thinking too about expectations. Oftentimes I suggest, um, I don't want to say letting go of expectations completely, but it's like transforming expectations into desires. If we start to expect something of people and they're not aware that we're expecting it, that gets to be a tricky place. Then we get disappointed and resentful. And, you know, but if we can bring it to someone as a desire, or as something that we really would love to explore or experience, that feels different than, God, why are you not doing this thing? Or, you know, having that sense of expectation on someone.
definitely. That's a very, very good point. I love that. Taking note of that. But going back to like taking ownership for the desires and communicate so that we can get what we want. Like, do you believe that's the direction for people in general, but men as well? We need to own that. We need to start accepting responsibility and understanding what it is for us, why we believe it's going to add value, and then learning how to communicate. Is that sort of?
I think that's really the path. And I think, again, some men are like, well, why do I have to do all the work? And I'm like, you don't. When I work with women, I tell them too, this is what you have to start to do. People aren't going to read your mind and all of that. So, but really, if one partner can start to bring more of that consciousness, it will shift the dynamic versus if you just keep doing what you're doing, nothing's actually going to change. So I think it's really powerful to start to get clear. What do you want? This guy who I was talking to was saying something. I was like, well, what would your vision be for an amazing sex life? And he was like, well, I don't really know because I haven't had one in so many years. And I was like, okay, great. But let's look at that. If you find yourself not answering those questions, then what's important is to really ask yourself, okay, well, what might it look like? What might be part of it? What might make me happy? Because if you don't know what you want, it is so much harder to get it, right? It's so much harder to reach that destination. If you're looking on a map and you're like, I don't know where I want to go, you're going to end up somewhere, but it may not be actually where you want to be, or it may not be satisfying for you. So yes, get clear on what it is, start to be able to put it into words, and words, again, it works a lot better if it's words that are inspiration rather than complaint.
Yep.
And I'm guilty of complaining and in my marriage that I'm not in anymore. I remember I wanted more, like I wanted a more spiritual sex life. I wanted more soulfulness or whatever, and whatever it is for you, that was what it was for me. And I would complain like, how come we don't have this? Or why is it this way? And that was so not inspiring to him. And, it didn't turn him on. It just made him feel worse about himself. So, right, getting clear, feeling into how you could say it in an inspiring way. And like you said, going back to why is this valuable and how can this support us? And then practicing actually speaking it. And then there's practicing like navigating the concerns or the anxieties or whatever, if you haven't been having these conversations, there's going to be stuff that comes up from the past. Well, now you're saying this, but how come I never knew that? Or you didn't ask for that before. And now does that mean you don't like me or don't love me or all those things, right? Then you've got to learn to navigate that part.
Guys, this is why you need to see Shana. Because there's a lot of navigating, and I'm a massive believer. It's like we can figure it out by ourselves, but life is so short. We want to get it done quickly, and we want to have the guidance to get there. I want to ask you one last question, and then I'd love for you to share where everyone can find you and reach out to, and I'll attach all of that in the show notes. But I would love to know, I guess, your definition of a real man. And the context of this is we're all so unique and individual. And I think as a society, and obviously each maybe country has a little bit different, but like there was a stereotype that I grew up believing I had to fit into in order to be the real man. And it didn't identify really with who I was at the core of things. And it left me feeling not very good.
No.
So I love hearing people's not opinions, but definitions of it, because there is someone out there who's listening and goes, that is me. And that's where I believe. And I think that's what we need to understand. There's no wrong or right. Obviously, if we're not harming people and stuff, but like there is space for all of us to be our unique and authentic self. So I'd love to hear that.
I love that. I mean, the thing that I think of when I think of real man is a man who believes in himself and who trusts himself to roll with, whatever comes at him, and knowing that it's okay to upset people, right? Like it's okay that other people aren't going to necessarily like what he likes. But if he actually feels true about it in himself, then, that to me is real. Like, I guess if we're going with the definition of real, right, there's that sense of, what's on my inside is what I'm showing on the outside. There's a genuineness or an authenticity. And I risk sharing that with people so that people can actually know me, is how I see it.
I love that. That first part where it believes in himself and trusts himself. Gents, that's what we can There's so much we can do around that for ourselves. We don't need external validation to just build that self-belief and to trust ourselves, right? The greater understanding we have, the more we're going to trust ourselves, the more belief we're going to have. And that's going to, create that ripple effect into the other things that you mentioned there, Shana. So where can we find you? So we've got an audience all around the world, and you're based in California, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Which is amazing. So it's 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. there now. It's only 8:04 a.m. here in Australia, but so there are time zones that works, gents. How can people
totally.
find
It totally works. I love this. Yeah. You can find me at, I have a guide that's the 3 ways men lose influence at work and with women. So that's at shanajamescoaching.com/3 and then the word ways, 3 ways. That's a great way to get a little bit of a sense of what I do. And from there, you can find my podcast, the Man Alive podcast, and lots of other resources there. My TEDx talk is there. It's called What a Thousand Men's Tears Reveal About the Crisis Between Men and Women. So yeah, reach out, feel free. I'd love to hear how this impacted you or what you're working on and what you need.
Yeah, awesome. I'll attach all of those there, and I'll definitely post the TED Talk in the group as well, so people can check that out and see what we've got coming up before this. Or by the time everyone's listened to this, you'll already know the TED Talk's out. But I'll post that TED Talk in the group today, which will be awesome.
Thank you.
Everyone hyped up to listen into the episode. But thank you so much for making the time. I've taken away so many notes from that, and I know a lot of the audience are going to get away so much and look into all the other resources, listen to Shana's podcast, The Man Alive, and I'll have all those links attached. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Now, gents, remember, like, share, and subscribe to this episode. Please help us continue spreading the message and putting the incredible guests that we have, all the knowledge and experience in the hands of other men who can benefit from it. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you guys either through Instagram or our Facebook community. We'll chat to you soon. See you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to the Man That Can Project podcast. My name is Lachlan Stuart, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did, please take a moment to rate and review the Man That Can Project on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our newest episodes. We'll see you again next time.